Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson. We're continuing our study of the resurrection accounts in the New Testament. In the Bible. Excuse me. We're in the Old Testament today, 2 Kings chapter 4, beginning with verse 18. And we're talking about the second resurrection account in the Bible, when Elisha raises the son of the Shunamite woman. We looked at Elijah's resurrection of the widow of Zarephath's son yesterday. So he's giving a son back to his mother, and it takes place in an upper room. The first three events, the first three resurrection accounts, these two and then Jesus' first resurrection account, is the return of an only son to their mother. In fact, the first four are the return of children back to their parents, which is interesting the way they all connect. I mentioned last time that all four of the resurrection accounts, Old and New Testament, that do not involve Jesus, all take place in an upper room, as does this one. The Elijah event yesterday was preceded by a miracle of the flour and the oil not running out. And so this event in Elisha's life is also preceded by a similar miracle. One of the widows of the sons of the prophets owed a lot of money, and they didn't know how to pay it. And so Elisha said, gather all the vessels you can and start filling them. And she ended up taking one vessel and filling up all the vessels with oil, sold the oil, paid off the debt. It's a very similar miracle. Elijah and Elisha are so different, and yet their lives are so intertwined and connected. And I don't want to take up a lot of your time this morning talking about that, but we'll see in these two events, these two accounts, that their demeanors are just so different. One might have to do with the fact that Elisha's life was never truly in danger. An army did come and surround the city to take him, but he handled that quite easily. And this story also involves Elisha's servant Gehazi, that we get to know in 2 Kings, not only in this story, but in the story of Naaman, the prophet. And Gehazi comports himself well here. He doesn't in the next chapter with Naaman. Elisha has been befriended. He has been given an upper room, an upper chamber, and a bed by the Shunamite woman and her husband, and they've really taken him in, and they have given him a great deal of hospitality. And so he says to his servant Gehazi, what should we do for her? And Gehazi says, well, she has no child, and her husband is old. And so, very much the way God announces to Abraham in Genesis chapter 18, or Gabriel announces to Zechariah. He says to the Shunamite woman, when I come back next year, this time next year, you're going to have a son. And she did. When the child was grown, all the way grown up or old enough to be weaned, or he's old enough to work in the fields because he comes in from the fields, he has something happens. My head, he's had a cerebral hemorrhage or something, but something, a heat stroke, but he has a terrible pain in his head, and then he dies. And so they send for Elisha. And anyway, he comes, and whenever he comes, she runs out to meet him. Gehazi tries to restrain her, and Elisha says, no, you let her go. Let her alone. Her soul is troubled within her, and the Lord has hidden it from me and has not told me yet. That's an interesting detail. Let me talk to her, because God hasn't told me yet what's going on, so let me get it from her. It's an interesting insight into the way Elisha's relationship with God operated. So then, 28, she says, did I ask for a son? Did I not say, do not deceive me? You gave me this child. I didn't ask for this child. You gave me this child, and now you took him away. What are you going to do about this? It's very much the way the widow of Zarephath treated Elisha. Um, so this is what happens. I'm going to read verses 29 through 37. He said to Gehazi, gird up your loins, take my staff in your hand, and go your way. If you meet any man, do not salute him. If anyone salutes you, do not answer him, and lay my staff on the lad's face. And the mother of the lad said, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, I will not leave you. And he arose and followed her. Then Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff on the lad's face. But there was neither sound nor response. So he returned to meet him and told him the lad was not awakened. Then Elisha came into the house, and behold, the lad was dead and laid on his bed. So he entered and shut the door behind them both, and prayed to the Lord, prayed to Yahweh. And he went up and lay on the child, and put his mouth on the child's mouth, and his eyes on the child's eyes, and his hands on his hands. And he stretched himself on him, and the flesh of the child became warm. Then he returned and walked in the house once back and forth, and went up and stretched himself on him. And the lad sneezed 7 times, and the lad opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi, and he said, call this Shunamite. So he called her. And when she came into him, he said, take up your son. And she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground. And she took up her son and went out. So he's big enough to be in the fields, but he's little enough for her yet to carry. So he's still a child, and he's called a child throughout. There's the whole business of Elisha, God not telling him specifically what to do in the moment. He sends Gehazi on ahead because the woman has come out to meet him on the road, something that we'll see Martha do with Jesus at the Lazarus resurrection account. And he sends Gehazi on and says, take my staff and lay it on the child. And probably thinking if the child is ill, that will heal him. But nothing worked. Gehazi comes back. And so he knows more is needed. So he goes into the room himself, and the child is dead. And so he basically does what he learned from Elijah to do. You ask God, and you lay on the kid. You stretch yourself out on the child, which he did quite specifically, face to face, hand to hand. He laid himself on the child. The child became warm, but not conscious. So life is back in him, but he's not conscious yet. So then he walks back and forth, and then does it again. Why walk back and forth? I don't know. Maybe he gave it a minute. Maybe he was thinking of what to do next. I don't know. He walked back and forth once, and then stretched himself back on the child again. It says the lad sneezed 7 times. But that word could just as easily be translated convulsed. And I think it probably is convulsed. But 7 is an important number. It's a biblical number. It's a significant number. There are 7 resurrection events in Scripture. And 7 times. And then he opened his eyes, and he returns to consciousness. And, of course, again, we have the same thing that always happens. He returns the child to his mother in faith. Faith is the result. Faith is the response. So God, through Elijah and Elisha, has demonstrated his power over life and death. That won't happen again, not in this way, until Jesus comes. We'll pick up with the story of Jesus and his resurrections next time.